evening and welcome to the NDTV Dialogues, a conversation of ideas. Tonight, Money and Muscle in Indian Politics, a new book just out, but also at a time when Uttar Pradesh, India's most populous state, the Hindi heartland, they say if you don't go through Uttar Pradesh, you can't win Delhi, is also voting. What exactly does this toxic cocktail mean for the Indian polity? What does it mean for governance? We'll look at that and much, much more. Joining me this evening is the former Home Secretary and also current BJP MP R.K. Singh. I'm also joined by former Minister and Congress spokesperson Manish Tiwari. Also with me, Ashutosh of AAP and Milind Vaishnav, the author of that new book. And we'll be starting with discussing some of the issues in that. And Milind Vaishnav, it's interesting timing really. And when we look at Uttar Pradesh, which is in so many ways represents some of the issues you talk about in your book. How do you see that playing out now in the democracy or in the elections of 2017?
I think the twin issues of money and muscle are as relevant as they always have been. I think many people felt that post-demonetization we would see some kind of curb in the costliness of elections, the cash that changed hands. That's not been my observation if you look at what's happened over the past several weeks. And muscle is more relevant than ever. And I think here, most political parties in India of all types, in all four corners of the country, engage in both. And I think we have to understand why we're in this particular equilibrium. And that's what the book tries to do.
When you look at the whys, in fact, if I can bring in Mr. R.K. Singh. Mr. R.K. Singh, as Home Secretary, in a sense, you were on the other side. When you looked at the rise of money in politics and how elections were fought and tried to control it in a sense, you were the law enforcer there. Here, you actually fought an election in Bihar. What was the difference you saw in reality, and why is it that more and more candidates who have serious charges against them of corruption, even who've been tried by courts and are convicted, still win elections? Why is that not changing in the democracy of 2017?
I think the responsibility for this needs to be taken by the political parties as well as the people. Now, the political parties give this excuse that, look, these are the people who are electable. The people will vote for them. And people do vote for them. Now, that is the problem. The people do vote for them because of the caste. Now, that is a problem in our society which is not going away, and it needs to go away. And these people vote according to caste, and they look at the strong people in their caste, those who
the Bahubalis.
The Bahubalis in their caste, who feel that they'll be able to stand up for them and fight for them. Now, that is one thing we need to tackle. And as far as the political parties are concerned, I think it is the responsibility to lead and not to follow. Now, when you say that I give a ticket because people will vote for him, that means you are not trying to lead, you are trying to follow. You need to sort of set an example. You need to say that, look, I want a clean governance. That means I will give tickets only to those who do not have a criminal background.
But the party you chose, the BJP, didn't do that. Even in the time of Prime Minister Modi's wave, there still is the fact that in Bihar, in Uttar Pradesh, many candidates who had serious criminal charges against them were given tickets by the BJP.
I spoke out against it, and I believe that every person in every political party needs to speak out against it. And only then will change come.
Manish Tiwari, let me get you in on that, because when we talk about change in Indian politics, and often being in opposition means that you point fingers at the government for doing exactly what you may have done when you were in power. Looking at Uttar Pradesh again, or looking even at Punjab and other aspects, money, muscle are never seen as negative factors. In fact, nowadays it's become about most popular politicians or the ones who are, say, chief ministerial faces have high number of assets. Questions are never asked about how those assets were made. Again, criminal charges are never even really taken seriously.
Well, Sonia, there are two aspects to it. You're absolutely correct that there is a preponderance of both money and, to a certain extent, criminality in terms of some of the eminences who are there in the electoral fray. But there is something which is changing. And what is changing is that no longer are they the only determinants. Maybe in a state like Uttar Pradesh or in Bihar, where you vote your caste rather than cast your vote, therefore these could be the determinants. But in other parts of the country, you are seeing a significant change take place. Even if, let's suppose, you do offer money as a palliative to people, people take money from everybody and vote according to their own will.
Which Manohar Parrikar and Arvind Kejriwal both said, take the money but vote for,
Well,
vote for the right
you
person.
know, whatever the Election Commission may say, that is a reality, because people give out SOPs. People take those SOPs and then exercise their franchise according to their conscience. So that's a significant change. And B, insofar as criminal charges are concerned, you see, there is another facet to it. At times, a lot of that is also politically motivated, because you cannot really run away from the reality that the law enforcement machinery is also used for the purposes of political vendetta. Okay. So you have some who have very heinous charges against them, people who, as Mr. Singh was rightly pointing out, it is incumbent upon the political parties to keep out. But consequently, there is also the vendetta factor. For example, if you look at the AAP in Delhi, now 21 or 22 of their MLAs, have been implicated in criminal cases. Now to say that all of them are criminals,
that's an interesting point here, Manish. And in fact, when you kept saying change, I want to look at Ashutosh, because I was wondering if he represents the party which you're talking about change, because frankly, Delhi was the first big surprise, but what's happening in Punjab, regardless of how AAP actually does, but the huge support we'll have got without the money and the muscle. So in a sense, where Milan's book may be a little depressing when you read it, but in a party like AAP, it's actually turned that conventional formula on its head. How is that working, and can it sustain?
See, the problem with the traditional political parties and the traditional polity is that it tries to look politics from the conventional point of view. And unfortunately, Aam Aadmi Party had demystified the conventional politics. And that is one reason that in Delhi we could get 67 out of 70, and in Punjab we are going to win with overwhelming margin. So there are the three, I find personally that the money power is the fundamental in Indian politics, and there are three angles to it. One angle is the tickets are bought and sold. That's one thing, and Mr. R.K. Singh himself has alleged that, accused his own political party when Bihar election was happening. Second is the distribution of money, and that money is huge. You cannot imagine that every voter has a price tag, and that starts from 10,001 vote to a lakh to a family. And I had seen with my own eyes that how hundreds of crores of rupees are distributed in one constituency, in MLA constituency. And the third point is the black money which comes into the political parties. You might go for the cashless economy, but the fact is today the amount of the fund which has been shown by the political parties, it's irrelevant.
Because the reality is different.
The reality is so humongously different. So
how did AAP manage without that? So in that sense, the conventional wisdom that the parties say we need this to win, how did AAP defy that?
Because AAP has demystified. The fact is the money, we have realized that today voters are much smarter. What Manish has said is right. When Arvind has said this in 2013, that you take money from every political party but vote for Aam Aadmi Party, then everybody was laughing at. But today, Mr. Manohar Parrikar has to repeat that. That means voter has become very, very, very smart. They understand that. But still there is a section of the society, section of the voter who still is trapped into that game.
Let me bring in Milan Vaishnav just on some of the themes that we've discussed around the table. Milan, looking at it perhaps as a triumph of Indian democracy, part of the complex nature of Indian democracy, but the fact that voters do make the choice often to vote for politicians who may be seen as corrupt, or maybe seen as bahubalis, as we talked about, maybe seen as criminals even, but they feel that they can deliver for them. And we've seen this, whether it's in the case perhaps of Lalu Prasad Yadav, formerly Bihar Chief Minister. We've seen this in the huge outpouring of public support for even ex-Chief Minister Jayalalitha, who was convicted at one time of serious corruption charges. So how do we explain that anomaly, that there's greater transparency, we know what they've got, we know the charges and convictions, and yet voters choose them?
So I think the problem isn't about transparency. I mean, I think we have this myth sometimes that only if we were to educate the voter, to raise their level of awareness, that they would vote a different way. Quite often, people are voting for these candidates, not in spite of their criminality, but because of it. Why is that? Because they look at the state and they don't find the state is effectively or impartially delivering on its core sovereign functions. So if a strong man can come in and help with welfare distribution, can settle disputes, can provide a sense of physical security. Life is uncertain. If there's some kind of shock, a personal tragedy, provide some money to tide them over. Until and unless you address that governance deficit, people will act this way, and it's quite rational. you know, I think we shouldn't talk down to the voter as
almost
if
a security net for them, which the
it's
government should
somehow
have provided.
trapped in this game that's being rigged by elites. Indian voters are very shrewd, and they're acting with a good reason. Now, what we have to do is, once we understand that, unpack how do we build up the state so it's delivering, so that people don't need to find a Robin Hood type figure who will swoop in and say, I'll do your work for you.
How do you explain the AAP phenomena? Because in a sense, I mean, AAP, many of their candidates are often literally the Aam Aadmi we've talked about in Punjab, where there's a cycle repairman, young candidates in Goa, where there's a single mother. These are not powerful people who can take on a system or be Robin Hood-like figures. Yet there is a sense of identification, at least in Delhi, when it was really a David versus Goliath battle where they managed to win.
I think there's been this idea or perception that clean politicians, by and large, can't deliver. And what AAP showed in Delhi is that there's a new experiment. Now, Delhi is a very unique place, has some very unique socioeconomic characteristics. It's a relatively small place, all things considered. Now, the true test is whether it could work in a place like Punjab. It could work in a place like Goa. And if that becomes a replicable model, that is going to have a huge impact on how politics works. Now, it's still early days, right? So we have to watch and see how AAP does and whether or not they make compromises, as most other parties have done, once they achieve success. Once you're on top, you want to stay on top, and that means maybe we have to bring in some other elements. So I think they've gotten to a small start, and let's see where it goes, but they're pretty unique.
In fact, let me bring in, we'll discuss that as well. But Mr. Ark Singh, just one point that Milind Vaishnav also made about, in a sense, a failure of a state to provide the welfare benefits that strong politicians are expected to provide. That is often, and we've seen also, like whether it's a case of Raja Bhaiya, whether it's a case of politicians he's talked about in his book, or whether it's the Shahabuddins, that they run almost parallel governments, which is why people vote for them, because they feel the government has failed them. How do we look at addressing those issues when you look at new democracy or India wanting to move ahead in terms of, yes?
I have something to say on what has gone before. One is that I think it's incorrect and unfair to the voter to blame him, because look at the history. Every time you have given the voter something which he feels is clean, you know, if he feels that he has a clean alternative at the top, not individual, then he's voted for that. Look at Rajiv Gandhi, they thought he was Mr. Clean, and look at him getting 400 seats. Look at what happened when Jayaprakash Narayan led that movement. You know, people went with him. They forgot everything. Look at what happened when VP Singh led it. I mean, people went with him. I mean, they left aside caste or all these things. So whenever people look at what happened when Mr. Modi was the prime ministerial candidate in 2014. Now, whenever the people have been given an alternative which has seemed to be clean and strong, and they have opted for it. I mean, look at AAP, for example. Now, the problem has been that our political parties have not looked at this history. If they had looked at this history, this is what I keep telling everybody. If you had looked at this history, they would have gone for this formula, and it would have won every time.
Why would a Nitish Lalu combination then work in the state assembly and not Mr. Modi, who was almost pitched? He was almost pitched as the chief, not as the chief candidate. He was the face. It was Mr. Modi versus Lalu Nitish. Why wouldn't that work in the state level?
Because Mr. Modi was not the chief ministerial candidate there.
Sure, but it was his politics in a sense.
It was his, but I mean, you needed a face there. You needed a face in Bihar which had the same credibility as Nitish Kumar. That's the point.
So Lalu Yadav's party got more seats than him.
I know. I know. But that is because, you know, I think that it was a combination of both Nitish Kumar's face and Lalu Yadav's caste. And
okay, I'm going to ask Ashish, how do you explain that? Because Arvind Kejriwal, the Mr. Clean, also hugged Lalu Yadav. So in that sense, even Arvind Kejriwal has made his compromises along the way in real politics. AAP's list of donors has also gone mysteriously offline.
Very much so.
I hope that just hugging somebody could convert somebody. I don't know. See, let me just answer the question you are asking to Mr.
No, but I'm asking you the question, not him.
Just reply, and there lies the secret. If Lalu had been presented as the chief ministerial candidate of Bihar, probably Lalu wouldn't have got half the seat which he got. The Lalu-Nitish combination got the seats better of Modi and BJP because Nitish was presented as chief minister. The people of Bihar believed that it will be Nitish who will be
the chief minister.
So that we have to understand. The second point is, most of the time when we look at Aam Aadmi Party, we think that, oh, these are the one-time phenomena. If the similar thing is being repeated in Punjab, a similar thing is being repeated in Goa, what did it speak? It does speak that the fundamentals of the Indian politics and society is fundamentally changing, and somewhere the conventional politics and politicians had failed to understand that. Even the academia had failed to understand that. Why a political party which is just 3 years old party, and when Modi was winning one state after another, could get only 3 seats in Delhi, and we are such a formidable force in Punjab and Goa. That phenomena has to be understood, but unfortunately that phenomena has not been understood even by the academia.
Well, let me ask the Congress, because in a sense along with the BJP, you're in the worst hit by, say, the AAP phenomena, as Ashutosh describes it, because whether in Punjab or in Goa, the Congress will be the worst affected. Why is it that the Congress has not been able to reinvent at all? You all got a drubbing in 2014, but by 2017, why are we not seeing a new Congress in a sense, just recognizing some of these issues being raised, that there is a desire for a new polity or a different kind of polity, which AAP is capitalizing on?
Well, Surya, before I venture to answer that question, let me pick up on something which Milind was talking about. You see, if you look at the demographics of India, out of 1.24 billion people, about 900 million people actually live in what is the rural hinterland. Now, their interface with the Indian state is at the level of a patwari, at best a kanugo or a tehsildar, and on the law and order side with a thana in charge who could be a head constable or an assistant sub-inspector of police. And that interface between the state and the people is not a pleasant interface at all. And God forbid, if you happen to be living in Jammu and Kashmir or in the northeast or possibly in the Naxal affected area, then the only face of the Indian state that you see is wearing olive green and carrying a Kalashnikov and possibly kicking down your door or your butt after that. Now, that's where the people require that interface. And that's why they look for that strong person who becomes the buffer between them and the state. So, Milind is absolutely correct. The footprint of the Indian state is actually a very light footprint. And wherever that footprint is, it's a coercive footprint. So, therefore, if you want to cleanse politics, you will have to reinvent governance in this country. And unfortunately, when you talk about reinventing governance, you have reams and reams of reports of the Administrative Reforms Commission, which has recommended everything, from motherhood to apple pie. Nothing has been implemented. So, therefore, now coming back to your question about the Congress, yes, that's a crisis for the Congress. The Congress, being the oldest political party, has over a period of time collected a lot of flab. And this is the fundamental challenge for the Congress as to how it reinvents itself. I am not trying to draw a parallel. When the BJP went out in 2004, it actually took them 9 years to reinvent themselves. Till the time Mr. Modi was anointed as the prime ministerial candidate in Goa, the BJP was at 6s and 7s. So I'm not saying it is going to take us 9 years, but yes, for established political parties which are not so nimble, the adaptability to change or the ability to be able to transform themselves is really a huge challenge.